The Secret of Shadowcreek. The late summer sun cast a blistering glow over the dry dirt of the Dawson County auction yard. Dust rose with every step, hanging in the air like smoke as the restless crowd shifted around the pens. The heat had been relentless for weeks, baking the earth until it cracked, much like the patience of the ranchers who gathered here, hoping for relief, either in the form of rain or reasonable prices. Robert "Bob" Sullivan wiped sweat from his brow as he adjusted the microphone on his podium. After 30 years as Dawson County's premier auctioneer, he'd developed an intuition about these gatherings. Today felt different. A strange electricity hummed beneath the mundane business of buying and selling livestock. He caught the eye of Clara Wilson across the yard, her ledger already open, pen poised. She'd been keeping the auction book since her late 20s, and at 47, she knew the business as well as anyone. The subtle furrow of her brow told Bob she felt it too. Something off-kilter about the day. "Looks like a decent turnout," Bob called to her, his voice carrying across the yard. Clara nodded her eyes, scanning the crowd. "Thomas Grayson's here. Haven't seen him at auction in years." Bob followed her gaze to the old ranch hand leaning against the fence at the back, his weathered face shadowed beneath his worn Stetson. Thomas had worked every major ranch in the county over his 70-some years. These days he mostly kept to himself, nursing old memories and older whiskey. "Let's get started," Bob said, turning to the crowd and raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dawson County's monthly livestock auction. We've got a fine selection today." The routine words faded in his mouth as a commotion rose from the holding pens. The metal gate scraped against wood, and the crowd parted as a handler struggled with what was being led into the auction ring. Then came silence. The kind of silence that thickens the air before a storm. The horse that entered didn't walk. It marched. A towering chestnut stallion chained at the legs, muscles rippling beneath its sun-slicked coat. Standing at least 17 hands high, it held its head proudly, despite the restraints, nostrils flaring, as it surveyed the crowd with wary, intelligent eyes. But it wasn't the horse's power that froze the crowd. It was the brand burned into its flank, an S inside a broken circle, a mark everyone there had hoped to forget. Bob's knuckles went white around his microphone. He glanced sideways at Clara, whose face had drained of color, her eyes locked on the horse, her mind clearly somewhere else. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Bob muttered. Clara nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "That's not just any horse. That's Thunder, or it's his ghost." At the mention of the name, a few old-timers in the back crossed themselves. Thunder was said to have died with Samuel Harrison in the Shadowcreek fire, but the distinctive scar behind the horse's left ear said otherwise. Ethan Reynolds stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart sinking as he recognized the brand. The Shadowcreek mark had disappeared after the fire that had consumed Samuel Harrison's ranch 20 years ago. His father, William Reynolds, had always spoken of the Shadowcreek land as cursed ground best left forgotten. But seeing that brand again, vivid and unmistakable, sent a chill down Ethan's spine despite the oppressive heat. The horse handler, a young man who clearly didn't understand the significance of what he was presenting, pulled on the chain. "This here's a fine stallion found wandering up north. No papers, but good stock. Starting bid at..." Suddenly the horse jerked violently. Once, twice, then the chain snapped with a crack that sounded like gunfire. The stallion reared front hooves, slashing the air as it screamed in fury. Chaos erupted as people stumbled backward, shouting, tripping over the rails. "Get back!" someone yelled as Thunder's massive hooves slammed against the pen wall inches from Bob's podium. For a second, it wasn't just fear in the horse's eyes. It was recognition. The animal stared directly at Bob Sullivan, then at Clara Wilson with an awareness that seemed impossible. Then it whirled, sending handlers diving for cover as it circled the pen, searching for an escape. From the far end of the arena, a woman in a long black coat stepped forward. Margaret Maggie Bennett, town librarian turned recluse. She hadn't been seen in public in nearly a decade. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her posture straight despite her 70 years. She held a yellowed envelope in her hand. The crowd fell silent once more, watching as Maggie walked purposefully toward Bob's podium. She didn't speak. She just placed the envelope on his table and walked away. The envelope bore the same S in a broken circle as the stallion. Bob stared at the envelope like it might explode. Ethan Reynolds stepped forward, his face pale. "My father said the fire took everything." He whispered more to himself than to Bob. Clara looked at him, trembling slightly. Maybe it didn't. Dust hung in the air again, unmoving, and inside that sealed envelope was a truth someone had tried very hard to keep buried. The chaos of the auction yard eventually subsided. Thunder was sedated and moved to a secure stall, though it took 4 handlers and a veterinarian to manage it. The crowd dispersed in clusters, hushed conversations breaking out across the fairgrounds. The scheduled auction resumed, but the energy had shifted. Everyone was going through the motions, minds elsewhere. Ethan Reynolds couldn't tear himself away. He stood by Thunder's stall, watching the magnificent animal through the slats. The sedative had calmed the stallion, but its eyes remained alert, tracking every movement. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said behind him. Ethan turned to find Thomas Grayson, the old ranch hand, his leathery face unreadable beneath his hat. "I'm just looking," Ethan said. Thomas moved closer to the stall, studying Thunder with knowing eyes. "That's Samuel Harrison's bloodline. Would bet my life on it." "That's impossible," Ethan replied, though without conviction. "Thunder died in the fire." "Everyone knows that." "Do they now?" Thomas removed his hat, revealing thinning white hair. "I worked Shadowcreek land in the 90s. Knew every horse on that property. That scar behind the left ear, he pointed with a gnarled finger. Thunder got that as a colt, trying to jump a barbed wire fence. Sam patched him up himself." Ethan looked more closely at the scar, a jagged white line barely visible beneath the chestnut coat. "But it's been 20 years, Ethan said. "How could—" "That's the question, isn't it?" Thomas replaced his hat. "And that's not all that doesn't add up. That horse should have died with the others. But if he didn't—" The old man's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe Sam didn't either." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. Samuel Harrison had been a fixture in local lore, the stubborn, principled rancher who'd refused to sell his land, despite lucrative offers, who died when his ranch mysteriously burned to the ground one summer night. Ethan's father, William Reynolds, had been one of Harrison's main competitors, though they'd maintained a grudging respect for each other. At least that's what Ethan had always been told. "My dad said the fire was the best thing that ever happened to Shadowcreek land," Ethan said quietly, repeating words he'd heard countless times. Thomas gave him a sharp look. Did he now, interesting thing, to say about a tragedy that killed a man and destroyed a legacy? You might want to ask yourself why your father would say such a thing, and why that horse chose today to come home. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the stall door creaking open. Clara Wilson slipped inside, moving with the confidence of someone who knew horses well. "You shouldn't be in there," Ethan warned. "He's dangerous." Clara ignored him, approaching Thunder with slow, deliberate movements. "He's scared," she corrected, keeping her voice low and soothing. "Aren't you, old friend?" To Ethan's amazement, the stallion lowered its massive head, allowing Clara to stroke its neck. The animal shuddered under her touch, as if releasing years of tension. "You knew this horse," Ethan said. Not a question. Clara nodded her eyes, never leaving Thunder. "I knew him, and I knew his owner." There was something in her voice, an old pain, carefully preserved. "Sam and I were Close before the fire. Close, Ethan pressed. Clara's hand paused on Thunder's neck. Engaged, she said simply. We were to be married that fall. Ethan had never heard this part of the story. I'm sorry, he offered inadequately. It was a long time ago. Clara stepped back from the horse, composing herself. But seeing Thunder again, it doesn't make sense. And that envelope Maggie brought. She shook her head. Something isn't right, Ethan. It never was with that fire. What do you remember about that night? Clara's face clouded. Smoke. So much smoke you would see it from town. By the time anyone reached the ranch, it was an inferno. The barn, the house, everything gone. They found remains in the rubble. Her voice caught. They said it was Sam, and all the horses were presumed dead. Except what? The scream, she whispered. Not Sam's or horses. One that sounded exactly like thunder. I've never forgotten it. She looked back at the stallion, and now here he is back from the dead, dragging the past with him. The auction office was small and cluttered, smelling of old paper and coffee. Bob Sullivan sat behind his desk, the mysterious envelope still unopened before him. Clara entered first, with Ethan close behind. Shut the door, Bob said, not looking up. Ethan did as instructed, then took a seat beside Clara. For a long moment, no one spoke. That's Sam's horse, Bob finally said, his voice strained. No doubt about it. Yes, Clara agreed. And this, Bob tapped the envelope. This is Sam's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. Ethan leaned forward. How can you be sure? Bob turned the envelope so Ethan could see the distinctive slant of the handwriting, the peculiar way the S was formed. Sam had a unique way of writing. Self-taught. Couldn't mistake it. Are you going to open it? Clara asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Bob hesitated, then carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The handwriting was firm, slanted, written in dark blue ink that had barely faded over the years. If this letter reaches you, Bob read aloud, it means Thunder found his way home, and so will I. The words hung in the air like the dust outside, suspended and unmoving. Bob read on silently, his expression growing more troubled with each line. What else does it say? Ethan asked. Bob looked up, his face ashen. It says, Samuel Harrison is alive. Clara's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room for several heartbeats. That's impossible, Ethan said. Everyone saw the remains. Apparently not everyone saw what they thought they saw, Bob replied, scanning the letter again. According to this, Sam went into hiding after the fire. He never meant to disappear, but he discovered something. Bob paused, his brow furrowing. Some truths only survive in silence, and some men aren't safe to confront. Who? Clara demanded. Who wasn't safe to confront? Bob shook his head. He doesn't name names here, but he says he's coming back to finish what he started 20 years ago. Ethan's mind raced. If Samuel Harrison is alive and has been in hiding all this time, he must have had a powerful reason. And powerful enemies, Clara added quietly. Bob carefully refolded the letter. Sam trusted me, more than most. If he reached out after all these years, he must believe something's coming, or that he's ready for whatever comes next. Then we'd better be ready too, Clara said, her voice firmer now, because I think Sam's already here. While Bob and Clara discussed the implications of the letter, Ethan returned to Thunder's stall. The stallion was more alert now, the sedative wearing off. It paced the small space, hooves digging deep into the dirt. What secrets are you carrying, boy? Ethan murmured, watching through the slats. Making a decision, he unlatched the door and slipped inside. Thunder's head came up, ears pricked forward, but he didn't charge. Ethan moved slowly, talking softly as he approached. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. The horse stood its ground, watching Ethan with those two intelligent eyes. Up close, the animal was even more magnificent, powerful muscles beneath a gleaming coat-proud carriage, despite its recent ordeal. Ethan reached out cautiously to stroke its neck, and to his surprise, Thunder allowed the touch. As his hand moved along the horse's side, Ethan noticed something about the saddle that had been left on overnight, a slight irregularity in the stitching beneath. Curious, he carefully lifted the edge of the saddle blanket. There, stitched into a hidden pocket in the leather, was a small, rusted key. Ethan's heart pounded as he worked the key free. It was old and heavy in his palm, its purpose unclear, but its significance undeniable. Someone had hidden this key where it would stay with Thunder no matter where the horse ended up. "What are you supposed to open?" he whispered, turning the key over in his hand. The answer came to him suddenly, the root cellar at Shadowcreek Ranch. It had been built of stone, partially underground, the kind of structure that might survive a fire. His father had taken him to the ruins once, years ago, pointing out the remains as a lesson in poor land management. Ethan remembered seeing the cellar door charred but intact, secured with a padlock that might fit this key. The sound of approaching footsteps made Ethan quickly pocket the key. He turned to find his father, William Reynolds, standing at the stall door, his face a mask of controlled anger. "What the hell are you doing?" William demanded. At 58, William Reynolds still cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered with the same dark hair as Ethan, now streaked with gray. He'd built Reynolds Agricultural Supplies from nothing, becoming one of the county's most successful businessmen. "Just checking on the horse, Dad," Ethan said, stepping away from Thunder. "This isn't our business, son. Let Bob handle it." William's eyes narrowed as he took in the stallion. "So it's true, Harrison's horse. You recognize it?" William's jaw tightened. "I recognize the brand. Didn't think I'd ever see it again." "You always said the fire was the best thing that happened to Shadow Creek," Ethan said carefully, watching his father's reaction. "What did you mean by that?" William looked caught off guard. Then his expression hardened. "I meant exactly what I said. Harrison was reckless. That land was going to ruin under his care. The fire was tragic, but it put an end to his stubbornness. His stubbornness about what? About selling when he should have sold, William snapped. Howard Maxwell offered him triple what that land was worth, and Harrison turned him down flat. Pride before sense, always his problem. Ethan had heard of Howard Maxwell, a wealthy developer who'd invested heavily in Dawson County land. Why would Maxwell offer so much? Location, access to water rights. Does it matter? The point is Harrison was a fool, and that horse showing up now is just stirring old troubles. William gripped Ethan's arm. "Stay out of it, son. Some ghosts are better left buried." "Even if they're not actually ghosts," Ethan countered. "There's a letter, Dad. From Sam Harrison. He might be alive." William's face drained of color. "What? That's impossible. Is it because you look like you've seen a ghost right now?" William released Ethan's arm, taking a step back. Whatever game is being played here, it's dangerous. Harrison's dead. Has been for 20 years. And you'd be wise to remember that. He turned to leave, then paused. "Come to dinner tonight. Your mother misses you." As his father strode away, Ethan's hand closed around the key in his pocket. His father's reaction had told him more than any words could have. William Reynolds was afraid, and Ethan was now certain that whatever this key opened would reveal why. Across town, Margaret Bennett sat in her modest home surrounded by books. The library had been her domain for 30 years before she'd retreated from public life, and literature remained her sanctuary. But today, not even her beloved volumes could calm her nerves. A knock at the door made her start. Rising stiffly, She made her way to the entrance, peering through the peephole before opening the door to Eleanor Davis. Eleanor, at 65, still carried herself with the dignity of her former profession as the town's high school principal. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, her clothes simple but elegant. The two women had been friends since childhood, sharing secrets that had bound them together through the decades. "It's happening then," Eleanor said as Margaret ushered her inside. "I saw the commotion at the auction yard." "Thunder came home," Margaret confirmed, leading Eleanor to her small sitting room. "Just like Sam said he would." And the letter, delivered to Bob Sullivan as instructed. Eleanor sank into an armchair, her composure cracking slightly. "After all these years, I never thought—" She broke off, gathering herself. "Have you spoken to him, to Sam?" Margaret shook her head. "Not since I saw Thunder's photo in the auction catalog last week. I knew it was time." She paused, studying her old friend. "Are you prepared for what comes next? The truth won't stay buried now." "Truth," Eleanor repeated the word like it was foreign to her. "We've lived with so many versions of it, I'm not sure I remember which is real anymore." She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope similar to the one Margaret had delivered to Bob. "He sent this for me years ago. Said not to open it unless Thunder returned." Margaret's eyes widened. "You never told me." "Some secrets were safer kept separate," Eleanor replied. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page, similar to Bob's letter. As she read, tears filled her eyes. "What does it say?" Margaret asked gently. Eleanor looked up, her expression a mixture of grief and determination. "It says Sam didn't run. He was taken. That fire wasn't an accident, Maggie. It was cover." She drew a shaky breath. "And Thunder was leverage to keep Sam quiet." Margaret leaned forward. "Why would someone go that far?" Eleanor met her gaze directly. "Because Sam knew something he wasn't supposed to, and now he's ready to talk." The Reynolds family home stood on a hill overlooking much of Dawson County. Built by William's own hands when he and Martha first married, it had expanded over the years as his business prospered. Now it was one of the finest houses in the area, a testament to William's success and ambition. Dinner was a tense affair. Martha Reynolds tried to maintain normal conversation, asking Ethan about his work at the veterinary clinic and sharing news about his sister's college achievements. But the strain between father and son was palpable. "I heard there was quite a commotion at the auction today," Martha said, passing the potatoes. At 55, silver now threaded through her auburn hair. "Nothing to worry about," William said curtly. "Just an unruly horse." "Not just any horse," Ethan corrected. "Samuel Harrison's horse, the one everyone thought died in the fire 20 years ago." Martha's hand froze halfway to her glass. "Thunder, but that's not possible." Ethan looked at his mother in surprise. "You knew the horse's name." "Everyone knew Thunder," she said, recovering quickly. "Sam Harrison bred the finest horses in the county. Thunder was his prize stallion." She glanced at William, who was cutting his steak with unnecessary force. It must be a mistake. Or another horse with a similar marking. "It's Thunder," Ethan insisted. "Thomas Grayson confirmed it. And there's more. There's a letter from Sam Harrison. He might be alive." The sound of William's knife scraping against his plate made everyone wince. "That's absurd," William said flatly. "I saw the remains myself. Harrison died in that fire." "You were there?" Ethan asked, realizing he'd never heard this detail before. "At the fire." William set down his utensils, his appetite apparently gone. "Everyone was there. The whole town turned out when we saw the smoke. By the time we arrived, it was too late. The entire ranch was engulfed." "But no one ever found out how it started," Ethan pressed. "Officially, it was ruled an accident lightning strike during dry conditions. But there hadn't been a storm that night, had there?" What are you implying? William's voice had turned dangerous. Martha intervened. Ethan, dear, this is hardly dinner conversation. Whatever happened back then was a tragedy. But it's in the past. Is it because it seems like the past just rode back into town today? Ethan pushed his plate away. Dad, you always told me Samuel Harrison was a rival, but a man you respected. If he's alive, if he was forced into hiding, don't you want to know why? William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough. Harrison is dead. End of story. And I don't want you getting involved in whatever scheme is being cooked up with that horse and fake letter. William, Martha said softly, a note of warning in her voice. He ignored her, leaning toward Ethan. Stay away from this, son. You have a good life, a promising career. Don't throw it away chasing ghosts. Why are you so afraid? Ethan asked quietly. William's face flushed. I'm not afraid. I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. I'm 30 years old, Dad. I don't need your protection anymore. Then act like it, William snapped. Act like a man who understands that some things are better left alone. The tension crackled between them, 20 years of unspoken truths hanging in the air. Finally, Ethan stood. Thank you for dinner, Mom, he said, kissing Martha's cheek. To his father, he merely nodded. I'll see myself out. As he walked to his truck, the key felt heavy in his pocket. His father's reaction had only strengthened his resolve. Tomorrow, at first light, he would visit the ruins of Shadowcreek Ranch and discover what secrets lay hidden in the root cellar. The Secret of Shadowcreek. Part 2. The ruins of Shadowcreek Ranch lay 5 miles outside of town, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that had long since been reclaimed by nature. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, Ethan Reynolds parked his truck at the overgrown entrance and continued on foot, the morning dew soaking his boots. Despite the passage of 20 years, the scars of the fire remained visible. Blackened timbers jutted from the earth like broken bones. The foundation of the main house was still discernible, a rectangular outline filled with weeds and debris. Nearby stood the collapsed remains of the barn, once the pride of the ranch with its state-of-the-art breeding facilities. Ethan moved through the ruins, carefully trying to imagine how it had been in its prime. Samuel Harrison had been known for his innovative breeding programs and sustainable ranching practices ahead of his time in many ways. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan that his father, who had often criticized Harrison's methods, had later adopted many of the same approaches once Harrison was gone. The root cellar was located behind what had been the main house, its entrance partially concealed by wild rose bushes that had thrived in the fertile, ash-enriched soil. Ethan cleared away the thorny branches, revealing a heavy wooden door reinforced with metal bands. The door was charred around the edges, but it survived the fire largely intact, and at its center was a rusted padlock. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he withdrew the key from his pocket. It looked impossibly small against the massive lock, but when he slid it into the keyhole, it turned with a dry, metallic click that seemed unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. The door creaked open, releasing a rush of stale, earthy air that hadn't moved in decades. Ethan switched on his flashlight and descended the crumbling steps into darkness. The root cellar was larger than he'd expected, with stone walls and a packed dirt floor. Shelves lined the walls, most collapsed, their contents long since rotted away. Broken glass crunched beneath his boots, canning jars shattered by the heat of the fire or subsequent looting. The air was thick with dust and decay. Ethan swept his light across the space, feeling a growing sense of disappointment. What had he expected to find? Some dramatic revelation preserved perfectly for 20 years. The cellar appeared to have been picked clean long ago. Then his light caught on something unusual along the back wall. Part of the stone foundation had been disturbed, bricks pulled away and stacked in a neat pile, as if someone had been in the process of creating a hiding place and intended to return. Heart racing, Ethan approached the gap in the wall. His flashlight revealed a small cavity behind the stones, and within it, a metal box, rusted but intact. He pulled it free with trembling hands, setting it on what remained of a wooden workbench. The lid groaned open to reveal a bundle of documents protected in plastic sheeting. Carefully, Ethan removed them, holding his breath as he examined the contents. Old photographs, maps of the Shadowcreek property, land deeds, letters written in the same distinctive hand as the note Bob had received Samuel Harrison's handwriting. One document in particular caught his eye, a formal letter from Howard Maxwell offering to purchase the Shadowcreek property for 3 times its market value. Attached was Samuel's written refusal, citing concerns about Maxwell's intended use of the land. Digging deeper, Ethan found what appeared to be a half-finished letter to the County Environmental Board. In it, Harrison detailed his discovery that Maxwell had been illegally dumping toxic waste on adjacent properties and feared Shadowcreek would become another dumping ground if sold. The letter ended mid-sentence, never completed or sent. Further down in the box was a county land use permit for agricultural development on property adjacent to Shadowcreek, signed by a county commissioner and countersigned by William Reynolds as a character witness for the applicant, Howard Maxwell. Ethan sat back on his heels, the implications washing over him in sickening waves. His father had vouched for Maxwell helping secure permits for land that was being used for illegal waste disposal. Had he known? And if Maxwell had tried to buy Shadowcreek for the same purpose, and Harrison had refused and threatened to expose him? "You shouldn't have opened that, son." The voice from the cellar entrance made Ethan jump to his feet, nearly dropping his flashlight. Silhouetted against the morning light stood Lucas Bennett, a rifle cradled casually in his arms. "Lucas," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Lucas replied, descending the steps. "But I think we both know." His eyes fixed on the open box. "That truth you found, it's not meant for daylight." Ethan's mind raced, calculating his options. Lucas blocked the only exit. The cellar offered no place to hide, no other way out. "Did my father send you?" Ethan asked, buying time as he slowly gathered the documents. Lucas chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Your daddy doesn't even know I exist most days." "No, I've got other employers. Ones who've kept this county's secrets buried for a long time." He gestured with the rifle. "Leave the box. Walk out nice and slow, and maybe we can pretend this never happened." "Like you pretended Sam Harrison died in that fire," Ethan countered. "Like you pretended when you transported Thunder away 3 days later." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "You've been busy." "Not busy enough," Ethan said. "Did you help set the fire, Lucas, or just clean up afterward? Careful, boy. You're in no position to make accusations." Ethan noticed Lucas's finger tightening on the trigger. In a desperate move, he threw the flashlight directly at Lucas's face. The momentary distraction was all he needed. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Lucas's midsection. Both men crashed to the ground, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Ethan scrambled to his feet first, clutching the document bundle to his chest. He vaulted over Lucas's prone form and up the cellar steps, emerging into the blinding morning light. He ran full tilt toward his truck, not daring to look back. Behind him, he heard Lucas's enraged shout, and then another gunshot. Dirt kicked up near his feet, spurring him to run faster. He reached his truck, fumbling with the keys, as another shot pinged off the hood. Finally, the engine roared to life. He slammed the truck into gear and tore down the rutted road tires, spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of Lucas standing in the road rifle lowered, watching him go. The man wasn't chasing, wasn't firing anymore. just watching his expression impossible to read at this distance. Ethan's hands shook on the steering wheel as the adrenaline began to ebb. The document bundle sat on the passenger seat, its contents now a weight he wasn't sure he was prepared to carry. But one thing was certain: Samuel Harrison had been right. Some truths were dangerous enough to die for, or to come back from the dead to reveal. Thomas Grayson's cabin sat at the edge of town, surrounded by scrubby pines and a small vegetable garden that somehow thrived despite the old man's minimal care. Ethan's truck skidded to a stop in the dirt driveway, sending chickens scattering. Thomas stepped onto his porch, a shotgun in hand, lowering it only when he recognized the visitor. Ethan, what in God's name? "Lucas Bennett just tried to kill me," Ethan blurted, clutching the document bundle. "At Shadowcreek. He had a rifle." Thomas's weathered face showed no surprise, only resignation. "You'd better come inside." The cabin's interior was sparse, but neat. A lifetime of ranch work had taught Thomas the value of simplicity and order. He gestured for Ethan to sit at the small kitchen table while he put on a pot of coffee, his movements unhurried despite the urgency of the situation. "You found something," Thomas said, nodding to the documents Ethan clutched. "In the root cellar." Sam Harrison had a hiding place behind the stones. Ethan placed the bundle on the table, carefully spreading out the contents. "It's all here, Thomas. Maxwell wanted to use Shadowcreek for toxic waste disposal. Harrison refused and was going to expose him. And my father." Ethan's voice caught. "My father helped Maxwell get permits for adjacent land." Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee, black and strong, before sitting across from Ethan. He examined the documents with a practiced eye, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. "I always knew that fire was no accident," he said finally. "Too many things didn't add up. But this," he tapped a finger on the half-finished letter to the environmental board, "this is what got Sam killed. Or what was supposed to get him killed." "You think he's really alive?" Ethan asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "I've wondered over the years, especially after I helped transport Thunder away from the ranch that night." Ethan sat up straight. "You?" Clara found a receipt with Lucas's signature. "Lucas drove the truck. I arranged it." The old man's eyes clouded with memory. "There was too much chaos that night. The whole town turned out to fight the fire. In all the confusion, it wasn't hard for a couple of us to slip away with the horse." "On whose orders?" "Maggie Bennett's. She said Sam needed us to get Thunder to safety. Wouldn't say more than that." Thomas sipped his coffee. "I didn't ask questions. I figured the less I knew, the better. For everyone." Ethan digested this information. "So Maggie knew Sam survived the fire." "Must have. And now with Thunder back and that letter delivered, she's setting something in motion." Thomas's gaze sharpened. "You need to call Bob Sullivan and Clara Wilson. They should see these documents. And you need to be careful. Lucas will have reported back to his employer by now." "Howard Maxwell." Thomas nodded grimly. "Maxwell's tentacles run deep in this county. Has for decades. He's built an empire on that toxic waste operation. Pays off officials, buys influence. No one's had the courage or the evidence to stand up to him." He gestured to the documents. "Until now." Within the hour, Bob Sullivan and Clara Wilson had arrived at Thomas's cabin. Clara gasped when she saw the documents spread across the table. "It's all true, then," she whispered, her fingers tracing Sam's handwriting on one of the letters. "He found out about Maxwell's operation, and they tried to silence him." Bob studied the land permits, his jaw tightening. Half the county board signed off on these, including the sheriff at the time. He looked up at Ethan. "And your father?" "I don't think he knew," Ethan said, though doubt clouded his voice. "He couldn't have known they were planning to kill Sam." "Maybe not," Clara conceded, "but he knew enough to keep quiet afterwards. We all did, in our own ways." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We all failed Sam." "Well, we have a chance to make it right now," Thomas said firmly. "These documents need to go to the state authorities, not the local ones. Too many people in the county are compromised." Ethan nodded in agreement, then froze as a new thought struck him. Wait, if Maxwell tried to have Sam killed once, and now Sam's threatening to come back with evidence, then Maxwell will try to silence him again. Bob finished the thought. "And anyone else who gets in the way." Clara's face paled. "We need to find Sam before Maxwell does." "I think I know who might know where he is," Ethan said. "Maggie Bennett. She helped him escape. She might still be in contact with him." "It's worth a try," Bob agreed. "But we should be careful. Maxwell probably has her watched, especially now that Thunder's back." Thomas rose from the table, his decision made. "I'll make copies of these documents. We'll all keep a set for safety's sake. And then Ethan and Clara should go talk to Maggie. Bob, you check if there's been any unusual activity around town. Strangers asking questions, unfamiliar vehicles." "What about my father?" Ethan asked quietly. The others exchanged uncomfortable glances. "For now, we keep him out of it," Bob said finally, "until we know exactly what his involvement was." Ethan nodded, though the decision pained him. Part of him still wanted to believe his father was innocent in all this, a bystander, not a participant. But the evidence suggested otherwise, and the uncomfortable truth was that William Reynolds had benefited greatly from Sam Harrison's disappearance, expanding his agricultural business into areas that had once been Harrison's domain. As they prepared to leave, Thomas pulled Ethan aside. "Be careful, son. Maxwell didn't stay on top all these years by being careless. If he gets wind of what you're doing, he won't hesitate to eliminate the threat, just like he tried with Sam." "I understand," Ethan said, the weight of the situation settling fully on his shoulders. "And one more thing," Thomas added. "Keep an eye on Thunder. That horse found his way back for a reason. He might lead you to Sam." Margaret Bennett's house on Elm Street looked like any other modest, well-kept home in the older part of town. White clapboard with blue shutters, a small front porch with a swing, and gardens that had once been meticulously maintained, but had grown somewhat wild in recent years. Nothing about its exterior suggested it might be harboring decades-old secrets. Ethan and Clara approached cautiously, aware that they might be watched. Clara knocked softly on the front door. No answer. She knocked again, more insistently. "Maggie," she called. "It's Clara Wilson. I need to talk to you. It's about Sam." Still nothing. Ethan moved to peer through the front window, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the glare. "I don't see anyone," he reported. "But there's a cup on the coffee table. Looks fresh." Clara tried the door handle. To her surprise, it turned easily. "Maggie," she called as they entered. "Are you here?" The house was silent, but there was a strange tension in the air, the feeling of a space recently and hurriedly vacated. In the living room, a half-drunk cup of tea sat on the coffee table. Next to it lay an open book, a pair of reading glasses resting on its pages. "Something's wrong," Clara murmured. She wouldn't just leave like this. Ethan moved through the house, checking each room. The kitchen showed signs of a hasty departure, a refrigerator door not quite closed, a chair pulled out from the table. In the bedroom, a drawer stood open, clothes hanging over its edge, as if someone had grabbed items in a hurry. "I think she left in a rush," Ethan said, rejoining Clara in the living room. "But why? And where did she go?" Clara's attention had focused on a small desk in the corner. She was leafing through a calendar, her expression intent. "Here," she said, pointing to today's date. "There's a note just in quote E.D. quote, with an address out on County Road 17. "Eleanor Davis," Ethan suggested. Clara nodded. "Has to be. They've been friends for decades. County Road 17 is out past the old mill. Isn't it pretty remote?" perfect place to meet someone you don't want others to know about," Clara said meaningfully. They were interrupted by the sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway, the crunch of gravel, then the slam of a car door. Ethan moved swiftly to the window, then relaxed. "It's Bob," he said as the auctioneer hurried up the front walk. Bob's face was grim as he entered. "We've got trouble," he announced without preamble. "Maxwell's people are on the move. Lucas Bennett was seen at the sheriff's office this morning, and now there are 2 black SUVs with out-of-state plates cruising around town asking questions about Maggie and Eleanor. We need to get out to County Road 17 inches, Clara said, explaining what they'd found. Maggie might be meeting with Sam there. Or Eleanor might know where they both are, Ethan added. Bob nodded. "Let's go. My truck's less recognizable than yours, Ethan. We'll take that." As they hurried out, Ethan noticed a small photograph that had fallen partially behind Maggie's desk. He retrieved it, glancing at it briefly, before pocketing it, a faded snapshot of 2 women much younger, standing beside a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out. County Road 17 wound through the most remote part of Dawson County, skirting the edge of national forest land, before dipping into a valley that had once housed the old sawmill. Few people had reason to venture out this way anymore, which made it the perfect place to hide or to meet someone in secret. Eleanor Davis's modest farmhouse sat a quarter-mile off the main road, accessible only by a narrow dirt track that cut through dense pine forest. Bob parked his truck behind a stand of trees, and the 3 of them approached on foot, moving cautiously through the underbrush. The farmhouse looked peaceful in the afternoon light, a 2-story structure with a wide front porch and a barn visible behind it. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney despite the warm day, and they could see a figure moving behind the curtains of the front window. "How do we approach this?" Ethan whispered as they crouched at the forest's edge. "We don't want to scare them off if Sam is in there." "I'll go first," Clara decided. "Eleanor knows me. She won't feel threatened." "Be careful," Bob cautioned. "We don't know who else might be watching." Clara nodded, then stood and walked openly toward the house, her posture deliberately relaxed and unthreatening. Ethan and Bob remained hidden, watching intently. Clara was halfway to the porch when the front door opened. Eleanor Davis stepped out, a shotgun, held casually, but unmistakably ready in her hands. "That's far enough, Clara," Eleanor called, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "What are you doing here?" Clara stopped, raising her hands slightly to show she meant no harm. "We're looking for Maggie, and for Sam. We know he's alive, Eleanor. We found the documents in the root cellar." Eleanor's posture stiffened. "Who's we?" "Ethan Reynolds and Bob Sullivan are with me," Clara admitted. "They're here to help Eleanor. We all want the same thing, to bring Maxwell to justice for what he did." For a long moment, Eleanor didn't move. Then slowly she lowered the shotgun. "Come out where I can see you," she called to the tree line. Ethan and Bob emerged from the forest, their hands visible, and approached to stand beside Clara. Eleanor studied them with shrewd eyes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded, once decisive. "Come inside," she said. "Quickly. We don't have much time." The interior of the farmhouse was warm and dim, heavy curtains drawn across most windows. A fire burned in the hearth despite the season, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something medicinal. Eleanor led them to a sitting room where Maggie Bennett sat in an armchair, her face lined with worry. "You shouldn't have come," Maggie said without preamble. "It's not safe." "Maxwell's people are looking for you," Bob told her. 2 SUVs in town asking questions. Maggie and Eleanor exchanged glances. "Then we need to move up the timetable," Eleanor said. "Move up what timetable?" Ethan asked. "Where's Sam Harrison?" Another exchange of glances, another silent communication forged by decades of friendship. Then Maggie nodded, and Eleanor turned to face them fully. Sam was badly injured in the fire, she said quietly. Burns over much of his body. Smoke damage to his lungs. He should have died that night, would have, if not for Maggie. She found him crawling away from the ranch, brought him here. I was the town nurse back then, Maggie explained. I treated him in secret, told everyone I was caring for Eleanor's bedridden mother. Her eyes grew distant with memory. He was in and out of consciousness for weeks. By the time he was stable enough to think clearly, the fire had been ruled an accident his death certificate issued. It seemed safer for him to stay dead. While he recovered, he told us what he'd discovered, Eleanor continued. Maxwell's waste disposal operation. The threats he'd received when he refused to sell. He suspected the fire was meant to silence him, but he had no proof until he saw the announcement of the new agricultural development on the adjacent property. Land that had previously been declared unsuitable for farming due to poor soil conditions. Land that my father vouched for, Ethan said quietly. Maggie's expression softened with sympathy. Your father may not have known the full extent of Maxwell's plans, Ethan. William Reynolds was ambitious, but he wasn't a murderer. Unlike Howard Maxwell, Eleanor added darkly. Sam spent years gathering evidence against Maxwell, tracking shipments documenting the effects of the toxic waste on surrounding lands. He lived under a different name, moved frequently. But he never stopped working toward the day when he could come home and bring Maxwell to justice. And now, Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper, where is he? Eleanor rose from her chair, moving to the window to peer cautiously through the curtains. He'll be here soon. Tonight was always the plan, once Thunder returned and the letter was delivered. Sam would come back to finish what he started. But Maxwell knows something's happening, Maggie pointed out. If his men are in town asking questions. Then we need to warn Sam, Bob said firmly. And we need to get these documents to the state police before Maxwell can move against us. Ethan's mind was racing. My father needs to know, he said suddenly. Whatever his involvement was 20 years ago, he deserves to know what's happening now. The others looked skeptical, but Clara nodded slowly. Ethan's right. William Reynolds may be many things, but he loves his son. If he understands the danger Ethan is in, he might help us. Before anyone could respond, the distant sound of vehicles approaching cut through the quiet. Eleanor moved swiftly to the window. 2 black SUVs coming up the road, she reported, her voice tense, and they're moving fast. Maxwell's men, Bob said grimly. They must have followed us. Is there another way out? Ethan asked. Eleanor nodded. Through the back into the barn. There's an old truck there, not much to look at, but it runs. You all go, Maggie said, rising from her chair with difficulty. I'll delay them. Maggie, no, Eleanor began. I'm an old woman with a bad hip, Maggie interrupted. I can't run, but I can buy you time. Her eyes were steady, her resolve clear. Sam needs those documents, Eleanor. He needs witnesses who can corroborate his story. You know I'm right. A moment of silent communication passed between the two women, a lifetime of friendship, compressed into a single look. Then Eleanor nodded, tears in her eyes. Through the kitchen, she instructed the others. Quick now. As they hurried toward the back of the house, Maggie settled herself back into her chair, picked up her knitting, and began to work the needles with calm, measured movements. The approaching vehicles grew louder engines growling up the dirt track. Eleanor led them through the kitchen and out a back door that opened onto a small vegetable garden. Beyond it stood a weathered barn, its red paint faded to a dull rust. They crossed the open space quickly, ducking inside the barn, just as the first SUV pulled up to the front of the house. Inside the barn, an old blue pickup truck sat beside stalls that had once housed horses, but now stood empty. Eleanor moved to the driver's side fishing keys from her pocket. This was Sam's backup plan, she explained, starting the engine. If things went wrong, we were to meet him at the old hunting cabin up in the national forest. He'll be waiting there. What about Maggie? Clara asked, her voice tight with concern. She'll be fine, Eleanor said, though her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Maxwell won't harm an old woman in broad daylight. Too many questions. But her eyes said what her words didn't, that Maxwell had killed before, and wouldn't hesitate to do so again if it served his purposes. I'll stay with her, Ethan decided suddenly. The rest of you go. Get the documents to Sam. I'll make sure Maggie's safe. Ethan, no, Clara began. I need to do this, he insisted. My father's signature is on those permits. I need to know what happened, and Maggie might be the only one who can tell me. His jaw set with determination. Go. I'll find my own way to the cabin later. Bob clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Be careful, son. These aren't men who ask questions first. Ethan nodded grimly. I know. He stepped back as Eleanor started the truck. Go, now. The truck's engine rumbled to life and Eleanor shifted into gear. The barn doors were flung open and the old pickup shot out into the daylight, bouncing across the uneven ground toward a back trail that led into the forest. Ethan watched until they disappeared into the trees, then turned his attention to the house where Maxwell's men were now pounding on the front door. Taking a deep breath, he slipped out the back of the barn and circled around, moving through the garden to approach the house from the side. Through a kitchen window, he could see Maggie still seated in the front room, apparently unconcerned as the pounding on the door grew more insistent. Finally, she called out, I'm coming, I'm coming. An old woman doesn't move so quickly these days. The door opened to reveal two men in dark suits, one tall and lean, the other squat and muscular. Both had the impersonal menace of hired muscle. Miss Bennett, the taller one asked, Howard Maxwell would like a word with you. Howard Maxwell can go to hell, Maggie replied pleasantly. I'm not going anywhere with you. The men exchanged glances. Ma'am, we're not asking. Mr. Maxwell is very interested in your recent activities. And the whereabouts of your friend, Samuel Harrison. Samuel Harrison has been dead for 20 years. Maggie said, her voice steady. As for my activities, I'm a retired librarian who likes to visit old friends. Is that a crime now? The squat man stepped forward. Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Ethan had heard enough. He burst through the back door, striding into the front room with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? He asked, positioning himself beside Maggie's chair. The men looked startled, then wary. Who are you? The taller one demanded. Ethan Reynolds. My father is William Reynolds of Reynolds Agricultural Supplies. He put subtle emphasis on the family name, knowing it carried weight in the county. I'm here visiting my mother's old friend. Is that a problem? The men exchanged glances again, clearly recalculating. William Reynolds was a prominent businessman, not someone whose son you roughed up without consequences. No problem, the taller one said finally. We just need to speak with Miss Bennett about an urgent matter. Well, as you can see, she's not going anywhere right now, Ethan said firmly. If Mr. Maxwell needs to speak with her, he can call and make an appointment, like civilized people do. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan maintained eye contact with the taller man, refusing to be intimidated, though his heart hammered in his chest. Finally, the man reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the side table. Mr. Maxwell will be in touch, he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat beneath the polite words. Soon. The men backed out of the house, their eyes never leaving Ethan until they reached the porch. Then they turned and walked briskly to their vehicles. Ethan watched through the window as they drove away, their tires spitting gravel. That was either very brave or very foolish, Maggie said when they were gone. Probably both, Ethan admitted, his legs suddenly feeling weak as the adrenaline ebbed. But it worked. For now. Maggie's eyes were shrewd. They'll be back with more men. and Howard Maxwell won't be deterred by your family name for long. Then we need to leave, Ethan said. I'll drive you to the hunting cabin. We can meet up with the others. Maggie shook her head. I'll only slow you down. Besides, someone needs to tell your father what's happening. Ethan felt a chill. My father, why? Because whether he knows it or not, William Reynolds is in as much danger as the rest of us now. Maggie's gaze was steady. Maxwell doesn't leave loose ends, Ethan, and your father's signature on those permits makes him a liability. The implications sank in slowly then, all at once. His father might have been complicit in covering up Maxwell's illegal activities, but that didn't mean Maxwell would trust him to stay quiet now that the truth was emerging. I need to warn him, Ethan said, already moving toward the door. Wait. Maggie caught his arm with surprising strength for a woman her age. There's something you should know first. About your father. About the fire. Ethan froze. What about it? Maggie's eyes held a mixture of compassion and resolve. William Reynolds didn't know Maxwell planned to burn down Shadowcreek Ranch, but he did know about the toxic waste. They all did, the county commissioners, the business leaders. They thought it was the lesser evil bringing money into a struggling rural economy providing jobs. They convinced themselves the environmental impact would be minimal. And when Sam threatened to expose them, Maxwell took matters into his own hands. The fire was meant to be a warning, not a death sentence. But it got out of control. Maggie's grip on his arm tightened. Your father was there that night, Ethan. He tried to save Sam. He ran into the burning house. Ethan stared at her, struggling to process this new information. But he didn't find him. Sam had already crawled out the back. I found him there, barely conscious. Your father emerged empty-handed, convinced Sam had died in the flames. Maggie's voice softened. Whatever else William Reynolds may be guilty of, he's not a murderer. Remember that when you confront him. Ethan knotted his throat tight with emotion. I will. Now go, Maggie urged. Warn your father, then meet the others at the cabin. Sam will be waiting. What about you? Maggie smiled, a fierce light in her old eyes. Don't worry about me. I've been keeping secrets in this town for 50 years. I know how to disappear when I need to. Ethan hesitated, then leaned down to kiss her weathered cheek. Thank you, Maggie, for everything. She patted his face gently. Go on now. The truth has waited 20 years. It won't wait much longer. As Ethan drove back toward town, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he couldn't shake the image of his father running into a burning building. It complicated the simple narrative he'd been constructing of William Reynolds as either villain or innocent bystander. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex, and in Dawson County, as he was rapidly learning, the truth was a dangerous thing indeed. The Secret of Shadow Creek, Part 3. The Reynolds family home glowed with warm light against the darkening sky as Ethan pulled into the driveway. His father's truck was there, along with his mother's sedan, a normal evening at home, while the world Ethan had known for 30 years crumbled around him. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. How do you tell your father that his past has caught up to him? That the man everyone thought dead for 20 years is alive and gathering evidence? That a powerful businessman might see him as a liability to be eliminated? The front door opened before Ethan could reach it. Martha Reynolds stood there, her face lined with worry. Ethan, she said, relief washing over her features. Thank God. Your father's been trying to reach you all day. I need to talk to him, Mom. It's important. Martha nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He's in his study. William Reynolds' study was his sanctuary, a room lined with books and memorabilia from decades in the agricultural business. Awards and photographs covered one wall, documenting his rise from a young man with nothing to one of the county's most successful businessmen. He looked up from his desk as Ethan entered, relief briefly flashing across his face before hardening into concern. Where the hell have you been? William demanded, rising from his chair. I've been calling you for hours." "I know why Thunder came back," Ethan said without preamble. "I know about Sam Harrison. I know about Howard Maxwell's waste disposal operation. And I know about your signature on those permits." William went still, the color draining from his face. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, with deliberate care, William walked to the study door and closed it. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly. "I know Maxwell tried to buy Shadowcreek to use it for toxic waste disposal. I know Sam threatened to expose him. I know the fire that supposedly killed Sam was set as a warning." Ethan took a deep breath. "And I know you ran into that burning house to try to save him." William's eyes widened slightly at the last revelation. He moved to a cabinet in the corner, poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass, and drank it in one swallow. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice rough. "Maggie Bennett. She found Sam that night, helped him escape. He's been in hiding for 20 years, gathering evidence against Maxwell." Ethan stepped closer to his father, and now he's coming back to finish what he started. William sank heavily into his chair. "My God," he whispered. "All this time, I thought he was dead. I saw the body, or what was left of it." "Maxwell made sure you did," Ethan said. "He needed everyone to believe Sam was gone. And now Maxwell knows Sam is alive." William's gaze sharpened. "Is that why his men have been watching our house since this morning?" Ethan felt a chill. "They're here now." William nodded grimly. "Black SUV down the street. 2 men inside. They've been there since I got home from work." His expression turned haunted. "I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would be you who brought it to my door." "Dad Maxwell's men tried to grab Maggie Bennett today. They're after Sam's evidence, and anyone who might help him." Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent. "You need to tell me everything. Now. Before it's too late." William stared at his son for a long moment, then nodded once decision made. 20 years ago, this county was dying, he began. Farms failing, businesses closing, young people leaving. When Howard Maxwell approached the county commission with his proposal, it seemed like salvation. A waste management facility that would bring jobs, tax revenue, infrastructure. But it wasn't just waste management, Ethan pressed. "No." William's voice grew heavy. "We learned that later. Maxwell had contracts with chemical companies, industrial manufacturers, anyone with waste too toxic or too expensive to dispose of legally. He promised us it would be contained, sealed underground, where it couldn't cause harm." "And you believed him?" William's laugh was bitter. "We wanted to believe him. By the time we realized the truth that he was essentially creating an unregulated toxic dump in our backyard, we were all compromised. We'd signed permits, accepted donations, looked the other way. Except Sam Harrison." "Sam?" William's eyes grew distant. He discovered it by accident. Found dead cattle on his property near the border with Maxwell's land. Sent samples for testing. When the results showed chemical poisoning, he started investigating. Found evidence of leaks, contamination of the water table. And he was going to expose Maxwell. William nodded. "He came to me first, actually. Thought I might help given my position in the business community. I told him to drop it. That he was putting himself in danger. That he couldn't fight someone like Maxwell. But he didn't listen. No." Pride and regret mingled in William's voice. Sam was always stubborn as hell. Righteous, too. Said he couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent. So Maxwell set the fire. William's face darkened. I didn't know about that part. Not until it was too late. I was at a business dinner when I heard. Drove like a madman to get there. His hands began to shake slightly at the memory. The whole place was engulfed. But I'd been to Sam's ranch enough times to know the layout. I thought I could get in through the kitchen, find him. "You tried to save him," Ethan said softly. "For all the good it did." William's voice cracked. "The roof collapsed just after I got inside. Nearly died myself. When they pulled a body from the ruins later, I assumed." He shook his head. "I never questioned it. Maybe I didn't want to." And afterward, the waste operation continued. William's expression hardened. Maxwell made it clear what had happened to Sam could happen to anyone who spoke out. To their families. His eyes met Ethan's. I had you and your mother to think about. So yes, I stayed silent. We all did. The weight of 20 years of silence hung between them. Ethan could see the toll it had taken on his father, the guilt and fear hidden beneath the successful businessman's exterior. "Dad," he said finally, "Sam is gathering evidence to bring Maxwell down. He's meeting Bob, Clara, and Eleanor at a hunting cabin in the National Forest tonight. They have documents, testimony enough to take to the state authorities." "It won't be enough," William said, shaking his head. "Maxwell has too many connections, too much influence, even at the state level." "Then help us," Ethan urged. "Your testimony can make the difference. You were on the inside. You know how this began, who was involved." William stared at his son, conflict evident in his eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking. Maxwell doesn't just walk away from threats. He eliminates them." "He's already coming after us, Dad. Those men watching the house, they're not here to protect you." "Maxwell doesn't leave loose ends. Remember, you signed those permits. You're as much a liability to him as Sam is." The truth of this seemed to sink in slowly. William's shoulders sagged as the full implications became clear. "Your mother," he said suddenly. "She can't stay here. It's not safe." "I'll take her to Aunt Judith's in Sacramento." Martha's voice came from the doorway. Both men turned in surprise to find her standing there, her expression resolute. "I've been listening," she admitted. "And William, Ethan's right. It's time to end this. For all of us." William stared at his wife, then nodded slowly. "Pack a bag," he told her. "Only essentials. And use the back door. We can't let them see you leave." As Martha moved to comply, William turned back to Ethan. "You said this hunting cabin, where exactly is it?" "In the National Forest near Pine Ridge. It's isolated, accessible only by a dirt track." Ethan watched his father carefully. "You're coming then." William stood his decision made. "I've been running from this for 20 years. Time to face it." He moved to a painting on the wall, swung it aside to reveal a small safe. Opening it, he withdrew a revolver and a box of ammunition. "And I'm not facing Maxwell's men unarmed." The black SUV began to follow them as soon as they left the Reynolds property. William drove his truck with deliberate calm, heading initially toward town, before abruptly turning onto a side road. "They're still with us," Ethan reported, watching the rearview mirror. "Good," William said grimly. "Let's lead them away from your mother." Martha had slipped out the back of the house 20 minutes earlier, taking William's sedan through the neighbor's connecting property to avoid being seen. She would be halfway to the interstate by now, headed for the safety of her sister's home in California. "How do we lose them?" Ethan asked as the SUV maintained its distance behind them, headlights bright in the gathering darkness. "We don't," William replied. "Not yet. First we make sure they're following us and not her." They drove in tense silence for several miles, the SUV matching their every turn. Finally, William nodded in satisfaction. "They're after us, not Martha. Now we lose them." He turned sharply onto an unmarked dirt road that cut through a stand of pines. "Old logging road," he explained as the truck bounced over the uneven terrain. "Connects to 3 different fire roads. Used to hunt here as a boy." The SUV hesitated at the turn, then followed its headlights swinging wildly as it navigated the rough track. William accelerated the truck, lurching and swaying as it plunged deeper into the forest. He drove with the confidence of a man who knew every inch of the terrain, taking sudden turns and switchbacks that left Ethan gripping the dashboard. After one particularly sharp turn, William killed the headlights and swerved onto a nearly invisible side trail, coming to a stop behind a thicket of dense undergrowth. He cut the engine, and both men held their breath as the SUV raced past their hiding place, unaware it had lost its quarry. "They'll figure it out eventually," William said, waiting a full minute before restarting the truck. "But by then, we'll be long gone." He turned the truck around, heading back the way they had come, before taking a different fork in the road. This one climbed steadily upward, winding into the higher elevations of the national forest. "Pine Ridge is about 20 miles from here," William said. "But we can't take the main road now. They'll have men watching it." "You know another way?" William nodded. "There's an old fire road that comes in from the north, hardly used anymore. Rough going, but passable in this truck." As they drove deeper into the forest, the darkness became complete, except for the narrow beam of the truck's headlights. The road deteriorated further, becoming little more than a game trail in places. William drove with intense concentration, navigating around fallen trees and washouts. "When did you last see Sam Harrison?" Ethan asked, breaking the long silence. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The day before the fire. He came to my office, tried one last time to get my help exposing Maxwell." Regret shadowed his face. "I told him he was committing business suicide, that no one would believe him over Maxwell, that he should take the money and walk away." "And what did he say?" "He said some things were more important than money, that he couldn't live with himself if he let Maxwell poison the land." William shook his head. "I thought he was being naive, self-righteous, but he was just being Sam stubborn, principled, unwilling to compromise when it came to what he believed was right." "Unlike the rest of us," Ethan said quietly. William shot him a sharp look. "Easy to judge from a distance, son. You weren't there. You didn't see what Maxwell was capable of." "I got a pretty good idea today," Ethan countered, thinking of Lucas Bennett with his rifle. "His men tried to kill me at the Shadowcreek cellar. They tried to abduct Maggie Bennett, and now they're hunting all of us." William fell silent, absorbing this. Finally, he spoke again, his voice heavy. "I've spent 20 years building a life on the ashes of Sam Harrison's. Everything I have, the business, the house, our standing in the community. It all came after Sam was gone, after I stopped fighting and started playing by Maxwell's rules." "It's not too late to make it right," Ethan said. William's laugh was hollow. "Some things can never be made right, son, but maybe they can be ended." He peered through the windshield at the rutted track ahead. "We're almost there. Pine Ridge is just over that next rise." The hunting cabin sat in a small clearing, a sturdy structure of logs and stone built decades earlier by the Forestry Service. A thin curl of smoke rose from its chimney, and a single lantern glowed in the window. Bob Sullivan's truck was parked nearby alongside Eleanor's ancient blue pickup. William cut the engine 100 yards away. "Wait," he said, putting a restraining hand on Ethan's arm. "We need to be careful. Make sure it's really them in there." They approached on foot, moving quietly through the underbrush. As they neared the cabin, the door opened, spilling warm light into the clearing. Bob Sullivan stepped out, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. "Bob," Ethan called softly. "It's me, and my father." Bob's rifle came up immediately, pointing in their direction. "Step into the light. Both of you." They did as instructed, emerging from the trees with hands raised slightly to show they meant no harm. Bob studied them intently before finally lowering his weapon. "You're the last person I expected to see here, William," he said, his voice neutral. "Believe me, I surprise myself," William replied. "But it seems we have a common enemy now." Bob's expression remained wary, but he stepped aside, gesturing them into the cabin. "Come in. But I should warn you there's someone inside who might not be happy to see you." The interior of the cabin was warm and dim, lit by a fire in the stone hearth and several oil lamps. Clara Wilson sat at a rough-hewn table sorting through documents. Eleanor Davis stood by the fireplace, tension evident in her posture. And in a chair near the fire, partially in shadow, sat a man Ethan didn't immediately recognize. The man rose slowly, stepping into the light. He was tall and gaunt, his once powerful frame now lean with age and hardship. The right side of his face bore extensive scarring, and his right hand was misshapen, the fingers fused together by old burns. But his left eye, the one not clouded by scar tissue, was sharp and clear, fixing on William Reynolds with an intensity that made the room seem to shrink. "Hello, Bill," Samuel Harrison said, his voice a rough whisper damaged by smoke inhalation 2 decades earlier. "It's been a long time." William stood frozen in the doorway, shock evident on his face. "Sam," he managed finally. "My God, you're really alive." "Disappointed." Sam's tone was hard to read, somewhere between bitter and genuinely curious. "No," William said, the word coming out almost involuntarily. "No, I'm not disappointed." For a long moment, the two men simply stared at each other, 20 years of history hanging in the air between them. Then Sam gestured to the table. "Sit down, Bill. We have a lot to talk about, and not much time to do it." The next hour was spent reviewing the evidence Sam had gathered over 2 decades. Maps showing the spread of contamination from Maxwell's waste sites. Medical records documenting increased rates of cancer and birth defects in communities downstream. Financial records tracing payments to county officials. And most damning of all, internal memos from Maxwell's company acknowledging the environmental damage and discussing ways to conceal it. "I've spent 20 years building this case," Sam explained, his damaged voice growing hoarser with each word. "Living under assumed names, moving constantly, following the money, the waste, the disease patterns. Maxwell's operation hasn't just poisoned Dawson County, it's spread to 3 states now." "How did you get all this?" William asked, leafing through a stack of financial documents. "I had help." Sam nodded toward Eleanor and Clara. "And I had motivation. Nothing clarifies a man's purpose like being left for dead." William flinched at that, but Sam continued without pause. "The problem isn't the evidence, it's getting it to the right people. Maxwell has connections everywhere. Local police, state regulators, even federal agencies. Anyone I approached, he got to them first. Discredited me. Made me look like a conspiracy theorist." "So why come back now?" Ethan asked. "What's changed?" "2 things, Sam replied. "First, Maxwell's operation has grown. He's expanding again, planning to develop the old North Ridge into another disposal site, land that feeds directly into the county reservoir." His one good eye fixed on William. "And second, I'm dying." The blunt statement hung in the air. Clara made a small sound, quickly stifled. "Cancer," Sam explained matter-of-factly. "Ironic, isn't it, poisoned by the very chemicals I've spent my life fighting against. Doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. I don't have time to be careful anymore. I need to finish this now while I still can." William stared at his old rival, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "What's your plan?" "Tomorrow morning, the State Environmental Commissioner is holding a public hearing in Carson City about new waste disposal regulations. It's our chance to present all of this." Sam gestured to the evidence spread across the table in a public forum with media present. Too many witnesses for Maxwell to silence. "Maxwell will have people there," Bob pointed out. "He'll try to stop you." "That's why we need to split up," Sam said. "Different vehicles, different routes. Make it harder for him to get to all of us." He looked at William. "I never expected you to be part of this, Bill. But since you're here, are you in all the way?" The question hung between them, a test, a challenge, an offer of redemption. William looked at the evidence spread before him, then at his son, and finally back to the scarred man who had once been his rival. "All the way," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes to end this." Sam studied him for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, because I think we're about to have company." The words had barely left his mouth when the distant sound of vehicles reached them, the low rumble of powerful engines moving slowly through the forest. Maxwell's men, Bob said grimly, moving to the window. At least 2 vehicles coming up the main track. How did they find us? Clara asked, her voice tight with fear. Doesn't matter now, Sam replied, already gathering the documents into a waterproof case. We need to move, fast. Eleanor extinguished the lamps while Bob doused the fire. William and Ethan helped Sam secure the evidence, packing everything into backpacks. There's a ranger station about 10 miles north, Sam said, consulting a map by flashlight. If we can reach it, we can call for help. On foot through the forest at night. Clara's doubt was evident. We don't have a choice, William said, checking his revolver. They've blocked the road. Our only chance is to go overland, stay ahead of them until daylight. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, headlights now visible through the trees, sweeping the clearing as the SUVs negotiated the rough track. Out the back, Sam ordered. Stay low. Stay together. Move. They slipped out the rear door of the cabin just as the first vehicle reached the clearing. Crouching low, they made their way into the dense forest behind the structure, the darkness swallowing them as Maxwell's men surrounded the cabin. The night was clear, but moonless, the forest floor treacherous with fallen logs and hidden roots. They moved as quickly as they dared, Sam leading the way with the sureness of a man who had spent years living on the edges of society, always watching his back. Behind them, shouts erupted from the clearing as Maxwell's men discovered the empty cabin. Flashlight beams began to probe the forest, accompanied by the crash of men moving through underbrush with far less care than their quarry. They're coming, Bob whispered unnecessarily, and they've got dogs. The distant baying confirmed his words, hunting hounds trained to track human scent through the wilderness. Keep moving, Sam urged. There's a stream about half a mile ahead. We can use it to break the trail. They pushed on through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing steadily louder behind them. Ethan found himself beside his father, both men breathing hard from the exertion and tension. If we don't make it, William said suddenly, his voice low, I want you to know I'm proud of you, son, for standing up when I couldn't. Before Ethan could respond, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree inches from his head. They ducked instinctively, dropping to the ground as more shots followed. They've spotted us, Bob hissed. We need cover. The stream, Sam insisted. It's our only chance. They crawled forward, staying low, as bullets continued to zip through the forest around them. The ground began to slope downward, and Ethan could hear the gurgle of running water ahead. Almost there, Sam encouraged. Just a little. His words were cut off by a sharp cry from behind them. Eleanor had fallen, clutching her ankle. Go, she gasped as Clara knelt beside her. I'll only slow you down. Not happening, Clara said firmly, helping the older woman to her feet. We all make it, or none of us do. William moved swiftly to Eleanor's other side, supporting her weight. Lean on me, he instructed. We're getting out of here together. The stream appeared before them, a ribbon of black water sliding over smooth stones. Without hesitation, Sam led them into it, the cold water rising to mid-calf as they waded downstream, leaving no trail for the dogs to follow. They moved this way for nearly a mile, the icy water numbing their feet and legs, but providing precious concealment from their pursuers. The sounds of the hunt grew more distant, the dogs baying, confused and frustrated by the lost scent. Finally, Sam led them back onto dry land, climbing a steep bank to reach a rocky outcropping that provided temporary shelter and a vantage point over the forest below. We'll rest here, he decided, just for a few minutes. Eleanor sank gratefully to the ground, massaging her injured ankle. The others formed a loose circle, catching their breath and taking stock of their situation. How far to the ranger station? Bob asked. About 7 miles, Sam replied. But we can't take a direct route. Not with Maxwell's men between us and it. And Eleanor can't move quickly, Clara added, concern evident in her voice. Sam nodded, his scarred face thoughtful in the dim light. "We need to split up," he said finally. "Create a diversion, draw them away from the main group." "I'll do it," William volunteered immediately. "I know these woods almost as well as you do, Sam." Sam studied his old rival, then nodded slowly. "Take Ethan with you. Head east, make noise, leave signs. Draw them as far from us as you can, then circle back to the ranger station." "What about the evidence?" Ethan asked. Sam patted the waterproof case secured to his back. "I'll keep most of it with me, but just in case." He removed a small flash drive from his pocket, pressing it into Ethan's hand. "Everything's copied here. Names, dates, locations. Get it to the commissioner if we don't make it." Ethan closed his fingers around the drive, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "We'll meet you at the ranger station," he promised. Sam's one good eye regarded him steadily. "You're not like your father, Ethan. You don't look away from difficult truths. That's a rare quality." He glanced at William. "No offense, Bill." "None taken," William replied quietly. "He's a better man than I am. Always has been." The simple statement hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound in its honesty. Sam broke the moment, his practical nature asserting itself. "You should go now, while the hunters are still confused. We'll wait 20 minutes, then head northwest toward the station." William checked his revolver one last time, then embraced Ethan briefly. "Be careful," he murmured. "Follow my lead. Stay low." Ethan nodded, throat tight with emotion. He turned to the others. "We'll see you at the ranger station. All of you." With a final nod to Sam, a man he'd just met, but felt he'd known all his life, Ethan followed his father into the darkness. William moved through the forest with surprising agility for a man his age, picking their path with confidence despite the darkness. They traveled east for nearly an hour, deliberately leaving signs of their passage: broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, an occasional footprint in soft soil. "You really do know these woods," Ethan remarked as they paused to catch their breath. William nodded. "Used to hunt here with my father, then later with friends from the business association." His voice turned bitter. "Including Howard Maxwell. You were friends, business associates, occasional hunting partners. I thought I knew him." William shook his head. "Until the night of the fire." They continued on in silence, the forest quiet around them, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of nocturnal creatures. Behind them, distant but growing closer, came the sound they'd been both dreading and hoping for, the baying of hounds back on their trail. "They've found our scent," William said grimly. "Good. Let's lead them on a merry chase." They increased their pace, moving deeper into the eastern section of the forest, away from the route Sam and the others would be taking. The sounds of pursuit grew steadily louder. "We need to split up," William decided as they reached a fallen log bridging a small ravine. Double their confusion. "No," Ethan protested. "We stick together. Son, listen to me." William gripped Ethan's shoulders. "One of us needs to make it to that ranger station with that flash drive. The evidence is what matters, not us." Before Ethan could argue further, a shout rang out behind them, followed by the beam of a powerful flashlight cutting through the trees. "There they are," a voice called. "Two of them by the ravine." "Go," William ordered, pushing Ethan toward the log bridge. "I'll draw them off." "Dad, no. I've spent 20 years running from this, Ethan. I'm done running." William's eyes were fierce in the darkness. "This is my chance to make it right. Now go!" With that, William turned and ran directly toward their pursuers, firing his revolver into the air and shouting at the top of his lungs. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before crossing the log bridge. Sam's words echoing in his mind. The evidence is what matters. He clutched the flash drive tightly and plunged into the forest on the other side of the ravine, his father's diversion buying him precious time. Behind him, more shots rang out, followed by shouts and the frenzied barking of the hounds. Ethan forced himself not to look back, not to think about what might be happening to his father. His only focus now was reaching the ranger station, getting the evidence to safety. He ran until his lungs burned, then settled into a steady jog, navigating by the stars, as Sam had shown them. Northwest toward the ranger station, toward safety, toward justice 20 years delayed. The forest gradually thinned as he approached the northern boundary of the national park. The first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, providing just enough illumination to make his path clearer. The sounds of pursuit had faded completely. Either William's diversion had worked, or something had happened to make the hunters abandon the chase. Ethan refused to consider the more dire possibility. The ranger station appeared ahead, a simple wooden structure with a radio tower rising behind it. Lights glowed in the windows, and a ranger's truck sat parked outside. Ethan approached, cautiously scanning for any sign of Maxwell's men. The door opened before he reached it, and Sam Harrison stepped out onto the porch, his scarred face breaking into a relieved smile. "Ethan," he said, "thank God." "You made it," Ethan replied, climbing the steps wearily. "All of you." Sam nodded. "Clara and Bob are inside with Eleanor. Her ankle's sprained, but she'll be all right." His eye searched the forest behind Ethan. "William." Ethan's throat tightened. He drew them off, created a diversion so I could get away with this. He held up the flash drive. "I don't know if he made it." A new voice interrupted. William Reynolds emerged from the trees on the far side of the clearing, his clothes torn, his face scratched but very much alive. "Takes more than a few hired thugs to bring down a Reynolds." Ethan rushed down the steps to embrace his father, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "I thought they'd caught you," he said, his voice muffled against William's shoulder. "Nearly did," William admitted. "But I know every hollow and hideout in these woods. Lost them in the old mine tunnels about 2 miles back." He looked up at Sam, still standing on the porch. "Figured you'd make it, Harrison. Too stubborn to die. Twice, apparently." Sam's laugh was more a rasp than a sound. "Likewise, Bill. Likewise." Inside the ranger station, a flurry of activity was underway. The night ranger had already called in state police after hearing their story, and a convoy was on its way from Carson City. Bob and Clara sat at a table organizing the evidence for presentation to the authorities. Eleanor rested on a cot, her ankle elevated and wrapped. "Maxwell's men will realize where we've gone soon enough," Sam said as Ethan and William joined them. "But by then, it'll be too late. The evidence will be in official hands, copies made and distributed. Too public to bury." "What about Maxwell himself?" William asked. "State police have a warrant for his arrest," the ranger informed them, hanging up the radio. "They're picking him up at his home as we speak." A strange silence fell over the group as the reality sank in. 20 years of secrets, lies, and fear were finally coming to an end. "It's really over," Clara whispered, reaching for Sam's damaged hand. "We did it." Sam squeezed her fingers gently. "Not quite over," he corrected. "There's still the hearing, the testimony. The cleanup will take years, maybe decades." "But it's a start," Ethan said. "The truth is finally coming out." Sam looked at him, then at William. "Yes," he agreed. "The truth." His scarred face softened slightly. "And maybe some healing, too. For all of us." Outside, the sun broke over the eastern horizon, bathing the ranger station in golden light. A new day dawning on Dawson County, the first day of truth after 20 years of silence. And somewhere in a secure stall at the auction yard, Thunder stood waiting for his master's return, his part in bringing the truth to light now complete. The circle that had been broken 20 years ago was finally being mended, the scattered pieces of lives torn apart by fire and fear slowly finding their way back together. Not the same as before. Too much had happened. Too many scars formed both visible and invisible. But perhaps something new could rise from the ashes of Shadowcreek Ranch. Something built on truth rather than silence, on courage rather than fear. As the first state police vehicles appeared on the horizon, lights flashing in the morning sun, Sam Harrison looked at the people gathered in the ranger station, old friends and former rivals, united by a common purpose. Despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, despite the cancer slowly consuming his body, a sense of peace settled over him for the first time in 20 years. Thunder had found his way home, and so had he.